Hey, everybody. Welcome back to your Full Tilt Tech Industry Leadership Talks podcast. I am Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We have an incredible guest with us today. Jeffrey Vincent is the new director of the FAA's UAS Integration Office. And Jeffrey is going to be talking with us today, not only about his life, but about the theme of collaborative leadership. So welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is so exciting to have you here today. And, you picked this theme, Jeffrey, of collaborative leadership. So I want to start there. Tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
Well, through my 38-year career in aviation, and I would say probably the past 20 years I've been spent in some type of leadership role. One of the things that I've learned is that when you include stakeholders or the people that work for you in the decisions, they tend to buy into it. A lot of times we think of leadership, and I was a former military person also. A lot of times we think about that as command and control. But one of the things I've learned is you've got to include everybody in your decision. And I find that it's very rare that I have to make a decision that it's just has to be done right now. It's so urgent that I have to do it right now that I don't have time to talk to my management team. I don't have time to talk to other employees or other stakeholders to get input. And I find that when you get that input and you talk to everyone else, your decisions generally people buy into them. And I find that probably 99% of the time, those decisions usually work out. In the times when they don't work out, you go back and you sit down, you talk again with your management team or your employees, and you explain the why. Or in those rare occasions where you really, really don't have time to consult with anybody else and make a decision, again, if you've done that in the past and you go back and you sit down and you explain the why and why you made the decisions, I found this been readily accepted by the employees. And it's the best way I've seen to get buy-in from your employees or from your leadership team.
Totally agree 100%. They always say better together. And what's that other trite saying? I think more heads are better than one, right? Like, so when you're trying to come up with some course of action, to have that kind of input is really critical. So I love your theme today. And what I want to do, Jeffrey, is kind of walk this back to the very beginning, to your roots, because you obviously are a collaborator, and I always find there's a little bit of nature, a little bit of nurture in that. And so I love to talk to people about, where they grew up. Tell me a little bit about your family. So let's start there.
Well, I grew up in rural Alabama, a town called Lincoln, and I grew up on a farm. Believe it or not, I was a farm boy, and joined the military right after high school. So it's kind of how I got my start. I became an Army air traffic controller. So that's how I got my start into aviation. I think certainly growing up in the rural background and certainly the military background certainly shaped me a lot. Especially around working with people, including people. I think that had a huge influence on who I am today.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about, I know where there's another picture rolling here of your early military career, which we're going to get to in a second. But I want to go back to that, just verbally go back to that picture. That was you in high school, leaning against a tree. And for everybody out there, we were talking before the show. I actually have an identical picture of my son, like from 3 years ago, for his high school picture, exact pose, leaning against a tree. So I love that. Jeffrey, growing up in Alabama on a farm, were there any formative kind of people or events in your life that really shaped your view of being a collaborative leader?
Well, I think back to something. I would say my father was probably the most influential person in my life, and he always taught me that you could do anything that you wanted to do if you just had the intestinal fortitude to power through that. That you could get there. But I think probably one of the most important things that he instilled in me that I still talk to my management team about today, and something that I still resonates with me. He always said to me, if success was easy, everybody would be successful. And so it was one of those things that he taught me. If you want to be successful, you got to be willing to work for it. And that's something that has resonated with me through my entire life, is that, I've always been willing to work for what I wanted. And another thing he used to tell me all the time, he says, as a young kid, most of us, there were times when you don't always, and being on a farm, necessarily want to do your work, the things that's required of you. And he used to always tell me, he says, I don't like work either, but it's the results of work that I care about. And that was another thing that's always resonated with me, is that when you want success and you want something to be successful, you have an image or desire of what you want. And I think that also has kind of worked its way into my collaborative nature, is that I have been willing to work for it, and knowing that it's going to take hard work to be successful and get there. So those were some of the things that early in my life that kind of resonated with me, and again, that shaped me into the person I am today.
Well, I love that. And also, kind of weaving it back into your theme, as you said, none of us get to be successful without a team and those around us. And by the way, speaking of team, we got a lot of folks out there cheering you on. You've got a cheering squad. Rob Hebert from Workhorse is not only saying roll tide, but thank you for volunteering and serving our nation. Clifford Kistner is saying hello, folks. And of course, Mike Peel is saying excited to hear from Jeffrey. So you've got fans out there already cheering you on, which is so awesome. Is there, you just weaved in a couple really cool things there, Jeffrey. Looking back, is there like one saying that you recall that resonated with you when you were growing up, that stuck with you throughout your life? I know I have one, but do you have one, like a saying that either, your dad or a teacher or somebody said? I mean, you just kind of had two, if you will, philosophies, but any in particular?
Well, there's three that I live by.
All right.
But there's one, I would say, the most important, that did start with my father. Again, you can probably see why I said my father was probably the most influential person in my life. And he used to always tell me, never forget where you came from, or never forget where you started. And that's something that even in any management meeting today, I still talk to my team about that all the time, because we all started somewhere. And my dad's purpose, I think, for telling me that was that, when you started, you probably fell down. You probably were not perfect. You made some mistakes and some stumbles along the way. And in order for you to be sitting there, somebody, probably gave you a second chance, probably allowed you to get up and dust yourself off, or allowed you to make those mistakes. And when I talk about, again, the collaborative leadership, I think probably one of the most important things that we can do as leaders is make sure that people know that there's room to make mistakes. They're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. And so when you remember what it was like the day that you started, the first day that you sit in the chair, the first day that you assume your leadership position, don't ever forget that. And when you have the junior executive or whatever sitting across the table from you, remember what it was like for you 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They're going through the exact same thing.
Yeah, maybe even worse, honestly, when you think about,
Yes.
like you and I, we look back, I don't know about you, but I had like a rotary dial phone. My kids are like, see these in museums now, like, what's that? I mean, so many things have changed since you and I have grown up, right? So that is beautiful, like giving people the grace to fail, appreciating that, hey, you were there at one point too, not everybody's perfect, giving them room to grow. That's all beautiful. Now you went into the military, but before you got there, you went through school in Alabama. Tell us a little bit about that educational path that led you then into military service with the United States Army.
Well, how I ended up in the United States Army is it's a crazy story.
I love to hear it.
It was not something that was intentional. So there was two things that led to me being in aviation. That picture you saw earlier, of course, was from 1983. So that tells you, I should tell you probably what my age range is. Well, in 1981, unfortunately, we had the air traffic controller strike. And I saw the air traffic controller strike on TV. I was 15 years old at the time, and I was just fascinated by air traffic and aviation, and I started to just read everything that I could possibly find on it. Well, fast forward a year or so later, I had no intention, no desire to go into the military, and I had to go to class one day, and that was an English test that I was ill prepared to take. Well, how I got out of taking this English test was I went to the military exam. So I went to take the military exam. Obviously, I scored okay on it. I get a call from a military recruiter, said, "How would you like to be an air traffic controller?" And just think of what I just saw, and I put the two and two together. And it was like a 3-year commitment, and you could be working for the FAA after that or whatever else. And he sold me, and that's how I ended up being in air traffic, and that's kind of how the educational route by accident is what got me into aviation and sitting here today.
I love that. And honestly, I don't believe in accidents. Like, I feel like one of the sayings from my mom was everything happens for a reason. And, like you just making that decision at that moment, like, I'm going to sit for this test. And then the synergy of seeing that on TV with the air traffic control strike and how that all worked out. I don't feel like that's a coincidence. I feel like it was in a way fate. And I think that's just such a great story. So thank you for sharing it. I think we all have stories like that where we can look back on our lives and say, it was this one pivotal moment or this decision, and then it combined with this, and then here I wound up over here, So really, really cool. Do you have advice to others about education? So I want to preface this question with something. I want to point out something you said that I think was great. You said you already had a passion for aviation and you would read everything you could get your hands on. That tells me right there, even though you may have been ill prepared for that one English test, that you are indeed a lifelong learner. So as you kind of reflect back on this concept of education, your own path, what advice would you give to those out there about the topic of education in particular?
Well, I would say, first of all, education is, extremely important. I have 2 sons, and they went the complete opposite route of me. Me personally, right out of high school, of course, I went to the military. I didn't attend college. I attended Embry-Riddle after being in the FAA and well into my career. But I think, looking at the landscape around us today, everybody has to make a decision about what's best for them. And you're right, learning, you can never stop learning, no matter how old you are or what the situation. But as far as getting, a secondary education or whatever else, I would always tell people, and having 2 sons, one is still in college, you have to do what's the right thing for you, and you have to know when and where. My older son, did not go to college right away. And then he went to a 2-year university before deciding to go on to get his degree at a 4-year university. My youngest son was a double engineering major, and right, he was into the books and walked right out of, he couldn't wait to get to school upon graduation. And then there's a lot of people sometimes that, need to take that year or whatever else. So you need to do what's right for you. And then a lot of people, like the practical application of the work experience or whatever else. So I think it all depends. I would never, ever, ever take away the value of an education. And I always tell my sons all the time, what you know and what you learn is something nobody can ever, ever take away from you. So it is something that's extremely important. And it's certainly something that I put at the top of my list. But I would always say to people, though, you have to do what's right for you at the right time for you.
No, sage advice. I think particularly in today's day and age, we just not quite through COVID yet. I think it really rocked a lot of students. I mean, everybody's world, but students in particular. And as I think about college specifically, how it dynamically and radically changed that experience I know I have 2 of my 3 sons that kind of went through that. And I agree wholeheartedly. There are a lot of different ways to learn. There's a time and a place for formal education, and it's frankly not for everybody. Like, I love the resurgence of trade schools, to be honest with you. I love the fact, Jeffrey, that you can be 16 years old, sit for the FAA's Part 107 test, and get a license, and then, work with a company or even hang out your own shingle, as long as you continue getting professional development and you're professional about what you're doing and have a real career. Like, I love the equalizing nature of drones in particular. So no, that is all very, very sage advice. So thank you for that. Let's talk about your Army days. So had a love of aviation already. Saw this strike on TV, joined the Army as an air traffic controller. By the way, everybody out there, that test that Jeffrey was talking about, I'm pretty sure you have to score pretty high to become an air traffic controller on that test. Like, there are definite career fields where if you're scoring low, they're like, okay, you're going over here. I don't think air traffic control is one of those career fields, or as they say in the Army, MOSs, military operational specialty code. So tell us about your early career in the Army, and air traffic control during that time. Really unique proving ground for you for air traffic control. I imagine you had a ton of responsibility very early on in your life and career.
No, and I think it certainly prepared me, for the FAA. One of the things that I learned coming into the FAA that the only thing that was the same between military air traffic control from the Army perspective and the FAA's perspective was separation standards. The rest of it and how they applied it was totally 100% different.
Wow.
And I got hired as a direct hire directly from the military, directly into the FAA. And they made sure I understood that on the very first day. I went to Boston Tower as my first air traffic facility. So they certainly made sure that I understood the difference between the Army and the FAA. But, my actual Army career, again, kind of one of those really ironic and funny things. People join the military to see the world. I was from Alabama. I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic training for 8 weeks. I go to Army Air Traffic Control School. It's located at Fort Rucker, Alabama, South Alabama. So I go there for air traffic control school. I get out, graduate, they send me across the street. I get stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh.
So finally, I get an opportunity. I'm going to be transferred to another duty station. So I go in to get my orders and see where I'm going to go or whatever. So I'm thinking I'm going to get some cool place overseas. Now I got sent to Redstone Arsenal, North Alabama. So I spent my entire military career in the state of Alabama. So of course, I get out of the Army, apply for the FAA. I get hired like 90 days later, and the FAA sends me all the way to Boston. That was my first duty station. I went to Boston Logan.
Oh, that's no joke. I mean, Boston Logan, I don't know the stats, but I imagine that's one of the busier airports in the country.
When I went there in 1986, it was the 11th busiest airport in the world.
In the world?
Yes.
Oh,
so
wow.
Army to Boston, yeah.
Talk about jumping right in. Like, I just imagine the briefing. Well, Jeffrey, you're no longer in the military, and we do things different here. Welcome to Logan. Over to you. Oh my goodness. I bet. So tell us a little bit about that. How long did you stay at Logan, and then kind of what was your path from there?
So I stayed at Logan, believe it or not, for 6 years. From there, I went to Charlotte, worked there for 3 years. And then I got my start into management and leadership after the 3 years in Charlotte. I went to Birmingham, Alabama. So I go back home to Birmingham, Alabama, and I became a supervisor there. From there, I went to Houston, Intercontinental. I worked there for another 3 years. And I came back to Atlanta, and I worked in a variety of different regional jobs there, staff job at the regional office there in Atlanta, Georgia. Eventually, I became the air traffic manager of Atlanta Tower. So I was air traffic manager of Atlanta Tower for 2 years. Then I made my first foray to Washington headquarters. I came up on a 1-year detail, went back to Atlanta, did a couple other staff jobs before eventually becoming the director of the Eastern Service Area. So that encompasses all the airspace from Maine all the way down to the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. After 3 years of that, they convinced me to come back to headquarters to do a short detail that was supposed to be about 60 days. And that was, by the way, 5 years ago. I came up to be the vice president of safety for a 6-month detail. They extended me for another 6 months. And then before I knew it, I was the vice president of air traffic services. And I spent the next 4 years being the vice president of air traffic services. And I laugh and I tell her, I said, those were some dog years, because I took over on December the 8th of 2018. And then on December 22nd, we had the longest shutdown in government history. So,
Oh gosh.
so I finally recovered from that. And then March of 20, of course, we have COVID. So I stayed in that job until just about 3 weeks ago. This is the 3rd week of being the executive director of UAS, so I'm really excited about that. So that's kind of my career full circle.
Wow, what a journey that was. And it cracks me up. It's like, well, I went there for a short, it's almost like Gilligan's Island, the 3-hour tour turned into 3 years or whatever. And, so it's like Washington, D.C. gets a hold of you and never, ever, ever lets go. So,
Go.
well, lucky for us. I mean, because with that background and what we're facing in the drone industry right now, I think perfect inflection point for someone with your background, especially as the UAS Integration Office is taking so much larger role in advanced air mobility and that UAS traffic management. So pretty cool. I think we have a picture of you in the DC area at FAA headquarters. I don't know if we can roll that now. So who are some of the people in this picture? And I was asking Jeffrey earlier, I'm like, is that the Pentagon? All the DC like government offices look alike, right? I'm like, is that the Pentagon? He's like, no, that's FAA headquarters. So what's this picture about here?
So believe it or not, I think that picture was probably when I was director of the Eastern Service Area. I think that was probably around 2016, 2017. And I'm just noticing when you said that, out of everybody in that picture, I'm the only one that's still working. All the rest of them are retired.
Oh, wow. That's
doing something wrong here.
or something right. I mean, there is something to be said for retirement. Just look at me. I'm having a blast here in my business, but that's cool. I really shout out, we had Rob Heber talking about volunteering service or the nation, shout out to everybody out there that serves the nation in one capacity or other, including a very large civil service cadre that not a lot of people frankly think about, but are like, I call them almost like, kind of like the guts of the government. It's just like administrations come, administrations go, and these are the people in the middle that are just moving it forward, no matter which direction the top is trying to push it. So gotta love the civil service. I was one of you at one point. So what tips, Jeffrey, would you give to any professional as they enter into some kind of career? Like, what are the things as you look back and reflect on that either someone told you, or boy, you wish someone had told you, that you'd like to pass along to others listening?
Well, I think you and I talked about that a couple of times during our segment here. Probably, to me, one of the most important things is don't stop learning. Always, realize that you can learn every time you get an opportunity to gain more knowledge of whatever, whether it's participating in, a different class or work group or something outside the norm for you. But I think the most important thing that I've seen is being willing to diversify yourself. Today, where you see technology is going and it just branches off in all different directions. You don't know where the next door is going to open. You don't know where the next opportunity is going to open. Don't limit yourself. And I see a lot of times people will have a specialty or whatever, and they'll only look for career opportunities that's within that spectrum or that small little circle. If you get an opportunity to branch out and do other things, you want to make that work experience portfolio as big as you possibly can. And so when you do that early in your career, it pays off. It will pay big dividends down the road, because you will have no idea. As we talk about, I'm a big sports fan, and a lot of times I like to kind of equate things in terms of sports. And when you're looking at sports, I always tell people In today's environment, if you can play, they will find you. It doesn't matter where you are. If you can play, they will find you. It's the same thing in the work environment now. Diversify yourself, get as much experience as you can in as many different areas as you can, and they will find you. You just don't know where that next opportunity is going to come. So don't limit yourself.
Totally agree. Just real quick story I'll share. One of my college age sons, worked in a restaurant one summer. And, he was just like stepping in to be the host every now and again, bussing tables. And, he reflected on that and said, it was awesome because I got to experience something. Number one, it changed my perspective now as a guest when I'm in a restaurant and how I should treat people. And, number two, I learned so much just about business, looking around and watching how this restaurant was being run. Now he's not going into the hospitality business, right? But just that one experience in something that was a summer job, changed his perspective in so many ways on, not only business, but life in general and relationships and how to treat people. So I agree, the more you can do, and it doesn't have to be work. It could be, hey, I volunteer over here. I have a passion here and I'm going to really jump into this aspect of my hobby that's going to make me a more well-rounded person, balanced, So that's spectacular advice. I absolutely love that. We're talking about balance, and this is the segment I love the most, Jeffrey, because so many people that rise to the level that you've risen in their careers, and this is a leadership podcast. We have a lot of leaders on here in the tech world. I asked him this question, and we noticed some themes last year that jumped out, but I'm just going to ask you, how do you maintain balance in your life?
For me, it's been very easy. Two things. First of all, I'll always realize that this is a job. It's not who I am. And I separate that. I think there's so many times people let the job become them, and that's who they are. I would never be, I'm Jeffrey Vincent, the executive director of the UAS Integration Office. That's not who I am. I'm Jeffrey Vincent. Being executive director of the UAS office is what I do. And I make sure that those two things always stay separated. Don't become your job. Be who you are. And the second thing that I've always done, and I've just never compromised, is that my family comes first. And the job that I just left, leading the largest ANSP in the world, it was pretty much a 24/7 job. So you had to make those hard delineations, and family comes first. If you truly mean that, then you have to actually practice that. And practicing those two things has certainly kept me balanced.
Yeah, so we're seeing a picture here now of you in your current job. And as you said, you are not the job. The job is the job. You are Jeffrey Vincent. We have a picture of your family here I'd like to pop up now, just kind of that contrast, and it's going to pan in. And I believe you said this was a wedding just really like last month. Tell us about this.
Yeah, December 19th. That's my oldest son there. Next to his bride. So I was telling you I have two sons. So I was lucky and fortunate enough to gain a daughter on December 19th. So my oldest son got married in Alabama.
Oh, well, what a beautiful picture. And there's your lovely wife as well, and speaks volumes. So as a practical, so you said that last job you were in was very stressful, almost like 24/7, but you had to maintain that balance. So as a practical matter, right? How did you do that? In other words, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, how do you do that when you're in a high stress, high pressure job? You're leading people, the stakes are high. How do you unapologetically put family first or take time for yourself so you have a piece of you left for your family?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. When I was saying to you earlier about separating yourself, from the job, Again, I tell people all the time, dealing with stress. It's like that English test that I was not prepared for at 30 seconds. Believe me, if you're prepared for your job and you step into that role, you know your job. And I depended on the people around me. I was not the smartest person in the room. I never pretended to be the smartest person in the room. I just happened to be the person that was responsible to listen to everybody else and coalesce all of the ideas or whatever else and make a decision. So I depended on those folks. So there was not a lot of stress. I didn't carry stress around. I let my team do what they were supposed to do. I stayed out of their way and allowed them to exercise the things that they should exercise and to do their work. The other thing is that when it was time to take time off, I took time off. There was certainly times when, weekends, the phone is always going. There's times when you're on leave or whatever else, the phone is going. But I'm an outdoorsman, and I like to hunt and fish. And there was times when I just, would get out and do those things that I enjoy. And, you just have to put a hard stop that says, I won't be reachable. Most of us, you have a team around you. You have a deputy. And I always say this to people. You don't pick a deputy unless you plan on them being the number one. So if you're planning on them being the number one, they should be capable. So when you leave them in charge and stay out of the way and let them do the things that they're supposed to do and allow them to lead. So that's kind of my way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to grow your replacement. And I agree with you, just that out of office, I think, Jeffrey, it's so easy in the military context in particular to, because we always say 24/7, 24/7, you're on duty 24/7, to buy into that and to never really ramp it down. And, when I switched to being a civilian, it was almost like this mindset shift for me personally, where it was like I was living around my work when I had my spare time. Once I became a civilian, because this, right? So there's laws, like there are set hours, and if you work longer, that's overtime. Military, you're just expected to work super late hours or on the weekends, without additional compensation, shall we say. So, in a way, it was that legal structure for me, being the legal person that I am, that helped me a little bit reframe that when I became a civilian, that like, I'm gonna live and then work around the times that I'm not living. And it was really a game changer. Like, honestly, when I became an entrepreneur, I flipped back a little bit again. No, seriously. I mean, because when it's just you and this is your business and you're like, I have to prove myself and I have to do this, you start kind of getting back into that 24/7 mindset, Saturdays, weekends, whatever. But, just really towards the end of last year, I realized, no, like, I need to take care of myself. I need to take care of my family. I need to stop taking myself. So I think that's the big thing. You kind of alluded to it. It was the nugget was in there. It's like, everybody's fungible, including you. And like the fact that your deputy, right? That's your replacement. They should be able to do the job. All of this. I think that's really sage advice for people. I saw two young ladies in the gym the other day, and the one girl's t-shirt said everybody's replaceable. And I almost went up. This was yesterday. I was this close to going up to her and saying, I love your t-shirt. You need to actually live that. And you know what I mean? Because understanding that, like, not taking yourself so seriously that you're going to have regrets later that I, didn't go to the kids, little Christmas show or whatever, because you know what I'm talking, you're laughing, but you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're saying, because one of the things, I have a little story that I tell to people about not being replaceable. I'll spare you the story here, but I will tell you.
No, I want to hear the story. I'd love to hear it.
Well, the story goes, when I was sitting there as the vice president of air traffic services, and you're responsible for 316 facilities and over 18,000 employees. And I used to tell people all the time, I never kid myself or fooled myself. I said, unfortunately, if I passed away tonight, tomorrow morning, every one of those airplanes are going to take off. All 316 of those facilities are going to open. And we would do a 7:30 stand-up. And I said, we had a COO. I said, the COO would say, for those of you who haven't heard, unfortunately, Jeffrey passed away last night. And y'all would go ahead and do the morning 7:30 briefing. I said, there might be a few tears shared. A lot of you might be going, hey, I said, but at the end of the 7:30, they would name who would be acting until the next executive would pick, and the world will go on. And that's the reality. And it's again, one of those things that helped me stay grounded and know, what came first and what was important. Because you have to realize that the world is going to go on without you.
Absolutely, it will. And, so make the most of your time that you have, because you never know when that clock will, kind of strike midnight, if you will. So I want to shift for a second and talk a little bit about leading others, since you have this collaborative leadership theme that you selected. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of collaborative leadership?
Wow. The most challenging thing I would say is to not try to give the answers. When I talk about collaborative leadership, it's about, it's 50-50. I do realize that as the leader, that you're responsible for, the ultimate decision or whatever. But I think probably the most challenging thing that we make when we're leading others is allowing people to make decisions and get out of the way. As I was saying earlier, they're not going to be perfect. If they mess it up, and I have another little fun saying that I always say in the office. I say, when people, didn't get it right, and I would always say, I said, did anybody die? Did anybody go to jail? If nobody's in jail, nobody's dead, we can do that again. We can redo that decision. And I think the most challenging thing is getting out of people's way and allowing them to lead and allowing them to grow. And when you're talking about a collaborative environment, they're going to bring ideas forward sometime that maybe you don't see where that's going to go, or you're not necessarily in touch with what they're saying. You got to give them an opportunity. You got to give it a chance, see where it goes or whatever else. That's the most challenging thing, I think, is to be hands off and knowing maybe when to assert yourself and when not to.
No, that's a great point. And, I've heard the saying before, God gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason, right? So listen more, especially as a leader, than you speak. And you'll be amazed at what people will be willing to share and contribute if you create that environment where they feel like they actually can in a meaningful way. So on the flip side then, on the positive note, what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of collaborative leadership?
Oh, just absolutely. When you watch a project or something that you're working on, and you watch it come to fruition, it's you get the same sense of pride, I'm sure, that you do with your children when you watch your children succeed. Watching people on the staff, on the team succeed, I could get no greater joy than that.
Yeah, that is really cool. Especially if, you had a part of it, even if that part was getting out of their way to let them do those things, that's really special. So best boss and why? Looking back, if you're willing to share. Some people are like, I'm not answering that question, and you don't even have to give a name, or, maybe give the anecdote or story. But what was it about that boss that you look back on and say, that was a great boss, that you try to emulate in the work that you do now?
So it's not one. So I won't give a name because it was more than one. So if I give a name and I leave somebody out, I will be in trouble as soon as
There you go.
Cats. But they all had the same traits in common. And first of all, they were not afraid to hold me accountable. They were very direct. They told me exactly what it is they wanted from me, how they want it done, and what they expected. But the most important thing was they got out of my way and they let me do it. They had a belief in me. They had an expectation that I was going to succeed. They didn't tell me to go and do this, and this is how I want you to do it, and they sit back and watch because they expected me to fail. They did. They expected me to actually succeed. So they told me exactly what it was they wanted, and this direct communication. That was the best boss I've ever had, and I try to emulate that. I found that people appreciate knowing exactly what it is you want them to do. If you don't give them instructions or whatever else in some nebulous way and they're trying to figure it out or read between the lines, I think there's no such thing as reading between the lines. Tell people what it is you want. Tell people what it is you expect, and then get out of the way. And those are the best bosses that I've ever had, and that is certainly something that I try to emulate in my leadership style.
And my guess is, Jeffrey, just basically from how far you've come, those same bosses probably set a bar kind of high. Like, in other words, I always found that, wherever you set the bar, that's what people are going to meet, right? Like, but so don't be afraid as a leader also to set that bar pretty high. Again, giving them room to fail, but, kind of stretching them so that they can realize that they can actually meet it and maybe even exceed that, so great stuff. Well, I knew our time would fly and we have like 3 minutes left. So at the end of every show, I do a lightning round. So we're going to do that now. And it's just 3 quick questions and you can give pretty quick answers. And here we go. Ready? Number 1, your favorite book.
Oh, gosh. I have no idea. I can't even think of anything I'm talking about.
Well, don't worry about that. The answers we get on that are all over the map, honestly. Some fictions, some not. Some people like, I don't have time to read books.
I have a favorite artist, so I love Tom Clancy. I just read just about everything that Tom Clancy ever wrote.
Well, there you go. So there's your favorite author, Tom Clancy. Those are cool books. And I think you already mentioned this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Your hero.
Oh, Muhammad Ali.
Nice. I thought you were going to say your dad.
No, my dad I say he was probably the most influential person, but looking for someone, and my dad was a big Muhammad Ali fan. That's probably why I ended up being a Muhammad Ali fan. And, certainly it was because of his skill, but what he stood for as a man, as a humanitarian. And I think that really stood out later in his life. You really saw a different person. So that was, if I had to pick a hero, that's what I would say.
All right. Very good. Very good. And the last thing is, we've kind of dropped these along the way, but I'm just going to end with it anyway. One leadership tip that you learned along the way that you'd like to leave with others.
So I told you there's 3 things that I subscribe by. It's all, I would say, one. And first of all, that is, don't forget where you came from. You talked about this also, but be willing to show grace and mercy to people. And the last one is, don't be afraid to give people a second chance. So those are the 3 things that I live by.
All right. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us. We're so excited to see what you do at the FAA UAS Integration Office now. And it's so cool to know a little bit more about you as you kind of enter into this journey with so many people in the community. So, Jeffrey, it has been a real pleasure. Everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the comments in the chat. We are out here.
Thank you.